In 2013, Naughty Dog released the PlayStation 3 exclusive video game, The Last of Us. The game received critical and financial success, and its phenomenal storytelling changed the medium forever. While the game never felt like it needed a sequel, that did not stop Sony and Naughty Dog from working on a follow-up to The Last of Us.
I can't be for nothing.
At PlayStation Experience in 2016, Sony announced The Last of Us Part 2 with a trailer showing a bloody Ellie playing the guitar and singing a cover of Through the Valley. At the tail end of the trailer, the character of Joel stands in the doorway to listen to the end of her song, and Ellie says,
I'm gonna find, and I'm gonna kill every last one of them.
4 years of anticipation and speculation, and The Last of Us Part 2 released on June 19, 2020. But unlike its predecessor, the sequel was not well loved. While the game eventually went on to win Game of the Year, it quickly became one of the most divisive subjects in all of gaming, with many people loving it, many people hating it, and not much of a gray area. The internet turned into a war zone in the days after the game's launch, with people arguing with each other over the game, and many people sending death threats to voice actress Laura Bailey, who portrayed the character of Abby, and the game's writer and creative director Neil Druckmann. The threats became so worrisome that Naughty Dog, the company who developed the game, eventually had to issue a statement saying, "Although we welcome critical discussions, we condemn any form of harassment or threats directed towards our team at Cast. Their safety is our top priority, but we must all work together to root out this type of behavior and maintain a constructive and compassionate discourse." 1 year later, the game still remains as a divisive subject, and it probably always will be. Now, while the game is not perfect, however, it cannot be denied that The Last of Us Part 2 is a masterpiece of storytelling and should go down in history as one of the greatest games ever released and one of the greatest stories ever told in any form of entertainment.
If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself.
When it comes to talking about this game, it's hard to start at the beginning. The most logical starting point when talking about The Last of Us Part 2 is at the moment when most people impulse deemed the game terrible, and that is when Abby kills Joel in front of Ellie. It was super early on in the game that people decided it was awful purely because their favorite character died. They did not want to continue playing. But if they were still playing the game after this, what would happen 15 hours later was the final nail in the coffin for most people. I personally think that Joel's death was the perfect starting point for this story. The first Last of Us is widely regarded as one of the greatest games of all time, and I think that knowledge factored into Naughty Dog's decision for how to start off the story in Part 2. They were never going to be able to top the first game unless they just did the story over again, but that's lazy writing. Instead, Naughty Dog decided to tell a risky and deep character-driven narrative, even deeper than the first, and they decided to shift the focus over to Ellie and focus the game on her and the character of Abby, who I'll talk about soon. Joel is not a good person. It is shown time and time again throughout the first game that Joel has a dark side. He is not afraid to torture people, he's not afraid to execute people, he runs people over with a car, he leaves a trail of bodies everywhere he goes to save Ellie, and that becomes most apparent in the first game's climax. This universe is one where every action has a consequence. There is no right in this world, there is no wrong in this world, and there are certainly no ethics. People will be killed for anything and everything in the world of The Last of Us. Some of those are people that are considered good people just trying to do the right thing. The game forces the player to relive the ending of the first game when Joel saves Ellie's life by executing an unarmed doctor that was going to dissect her brain to develop a cure for the cordyceps that destroyed humanity. That doctor, who is later revealed to be Abby's father, was killed for his decision, just like Joel was later executed for his. It is not a world where people are left standing if they get in someone's way. It's why there are factions throughout that are constantly at war with each other instead of banding together to defeat the zombies that now roam the country. Everyone is so obsessed with their own survival and the survival of their loved ones that they will put down everyone in their way. And at first, it's unclear why Abby kills Joel. The player doesn't find out until much later, and Ellie never finds out. Instead, Abby takes the place of a villain, an antagonist, someone that Ellie has to stop. Immediately after Joel's death, the game establishes a revenge story where Ellie hunts down Joel's killer, but it establishes a revenge story in two ways. Ellie wants revenge, but maybe even more so, the player wants revenge. The player wants revenge for their favorite character. But the game is about so much more than revenge, and the theme of the game is certainly not that revenge is bad. There are a bunch of flashbacks to Ellie's time with Joel in the 4 years between the two games, and the player is forced to play as Abby for 10 hours. This is not what you do when your game is a simple revenge story. The theme is not that revenge is bad. I'll get to the actual theme of the game in a little bit. The game devotes roughly 10 hours of playtime to Ellie's story after Joel's death. She and her girlfriend Dina track Joel's brother Tommy to Seattle where he went to go hunt Abby. They ride through the destroyed city and they fight more zombies and humans than they would care to count. But the strength in these sections is the bond and growth between Ellie and Dina. My favorite part of The Last of Us Part 2 is a scene that is easy to miss if you're playing only for the story and not exploring every nook and cranny of what the world has to offer. Not long into the game, Ellie and Dina come across an open world section of Seattle. Only about 3 or 4 of the buildings are mandatory to go to, but I chose to explore every single one of them. In one of these buildings is a guitar. After picking it up, the game prompts you to start playing, and eventually a cutscene plays where Ellie sings "Take On Me" to Dina. After the song plays, the two characters talk, and it's made clear just how much Ellie and Dina love each other. After that, the player regains control and is free to roam around some more, or proceed to the building the story requires them to go to. I was shocked when I first saw the scene. I was shocked just how much story Naughty Dog packed into completely missable moments like this. If someone's not looking for that guitar, there's a slim chance they'll find it, which means they'll not get to hear the beautiful song, which means they won't get that moment between Ellie and Dina. A moment that, while not important to understand the entire story of the game, only elevates it that much more. No game besides The Last of Us Part 2 has ever rewarded exploration on that level. Most games nowadays pack collectibles and side missions into a game to increase the runtime, but Naughty Dog chose to make every corner of its worlds count by packing it full of journal entries and trading cards that Ellie collects, and especially moments like Ellie playing the guitar to take a short moment of rest after the gut punch that was delivered not too long prior. And the best part is that they mask it all by putting loot and supplies all over the world that demands exploration. So instead of looking for collectibles, you just happen to stumble upon them, and that gives each collectible a story. Ellie didn't find a trading card because I was trying to 100% the game. Ellie found a trading card because I was looking for 3 bullets and happened to found a trading card in a locker next to him. There is so much depth and character packed into every second of gameplay. Naughty Dog perfected exploration in the first game and somehow made it even more perfect in this game. At the end of day 1, Ellie and Dina manage to make it to a theater, and it is revealed that Dina is pregnant with Jesse's child. Seattle Day 2 sends Ellie out on her own quest, and it begins to show Ellie's descent from secret savior of humanity to tragic hero, an excellent reverse of the story Naughty Dog chooses to tell with Abby. Ellie tracks down Abby's friend Nora and becomes so obsessed with revenge for Joel that she starts to do unspeakable acts. Instead of letting Nora go once she's no longer useful, or instead of just putting a bullet in her head to make it quick, Ellie instead chooses to bludgeon Nora to death with a lead pipe to replicate what Abby did to Joel. As the player, what shocked me most about this is 2 things. First, this moment's not a cutscene. The player is forced to control the section. They're forced to bludgeon an unarmed, injured woman to death with a pipe out of pure rage, and even though I was only pressing the square button, I felt at least partially responsible. And second, the most shocking thing is that after this horrific act, Ellie feels nothing. She just throws the pipe down and goes on her way. At this moment, the game takes Ellie out of hero status. At this point in time, she's no longer a good person. She is extremely dark. She lies about in the middle of the good-evil scale while Abby sits purely on the evil end. At least in my mind, that was the case. But it gets worse, because Seattle Day 3 sees Ellie track Abby's location to an aquarium. She fights her way through a violent storm just to find out that Abby's not there. But due to her desire for revenge, this decision ends up resulting in her killing Abby's dog Alice, as well as Abby's friends Owen and Mel. And after gutting Mel, Ellie finally takes the time to see that she was noticeably pregnant, and Ellie had just killed an unborn child. I have never felt as similar to a fictional character as I did when Ellie kills Mel. She goes into shock and almost throws up, and while I didn't feel the urge to throw up, I too was in shock of what Ellie had just done. Part of the beauty of The Last of Us Part 2 is its choice to ditch a linear story and sprinkle flashbacks throughout the game. But the placement of these flashbacks is strategic. Ellie's 3 days in Seattle shows her morality and her sense of good leave her, sending her down a tragic path. The flashbacks tell the same story, with the first flashback being from one of her happiest memories with Joel, to the last flashback being her worst memory with Joel. And after playing as Ellie for over 10 hours, experiencing her story and getting to know and love all of her side characters, the game brings Ellie face to face with Abby, the woman who killed Joel in cold blood right in front of Ellie's eyes, the character that the player has been taught to hate and want to kill the entire game thus far. A boss battle is teased, but before the player is even given control of Ellie, the camera cuts. And it fades into this.
Dad? Dad! Dad! Come on.
I think it's safe to say that the moment Naughty Dog forced us to play as Abby was the final nail in the coffin for a lot of people. We were taught to hate this character at the same time Ellie was for very valid reasons, and now we have to play as her. Not for a short section, not for a few minutes. We have to play as her for a third of the game. We have to treat her as the protagonist. We have to keep her alive for 10 hours. We have to survive as the character that we all want to see die. And so why is this? Everyone says that Naughty Dog is trying to make us like Abby as much as we like Ellie and Joel, and that is blatantly not true. If you did not like Abby when you played, and you still did not like Abby when you finished, that is also fine. Playing as Abby is meant to make us see the broader scope of this world. Abby's story is merely another story in this twisted world. Her only relevance to the story is that Joel killed her father, and for that, she wants revenge. But Abby's revenge quest happens off-screen. We only see the culmination of her revenge when she stumbles across Joel during a clicker and runner attack. Rest of the story finds her off on her own separate adventure, not even connected to Ellie. The story we instead get for Abby is Joel's story. Abby's story mirrors Joel in a big way. Their stories are not carbon copies of each other, just as I wouldn't expect them to be, but the basis for their storylines is the same. Two veteran warriors in this post-apocalyptic land are given the burden of transporting a child to the Fireflies despite their reluctance to do so. On this journey, they find someone to fight for and move heaven and earth to save the person, and at the end, they narrowly escape to go live a peaceful life while the person they had to hurt to do so lives in pain and agony as a result of what the other person did. During my playthrough of The Last of Us Part 2, I found myself slowly becoming more and more interested in Abby's side of the story as the game continued. I did not think that Lev, her traveling companion, was the greatest character, but I did like him to the degree I was supposed to. The purpose of Lev's character is to make the audience understand Abby and her motives, and understand that she's not a murderous, rage-stricken character, but rather someone who's trying to save someone's life. And it worked. As I played through Abby's section, I got to the point where I saw the good in her. I didn't hate her. I saw her as another person in this twisted world just trying to survive in whatever way she can. But around Seattle Day 3, I found myself liking Abby more and more. And once Abby's gameplay section ended and the game brought me back to the theater, I actually liked Abby more than Ellie. Granted, I did not love Abby just as I did not hate Ellie. They were both extremely great characters at this point, but I liked Abby more, for one reason. When the game finally caught back up to itself, I had been keeping track of each character's named character kill count, and Abby was lower. Abby had only killed 2 named characters in the game, Joel and Jesse. She killed Joel out of revenge and killed Jesse purely as a reaction, and I think she also saw the danger that Jesse possessed, and being the first out the door meant he was a big danger to her. She lets Tommy live twice, she let Ellie live, she left them alone. Her only 2 kills were Joel and Jesse. Now compare that to Ellie. Ellie bludgeons Nora to death with a pipe out of pure rage. Then she kills Alice. Granted, she had to kill Alice because Alice attacked her. Then she kills Owen and a pregnant Mel. On top of that, Tommy killed some people, but when given the chance to kill Tommy, Abby knocked him out and he lived to fight another day. Not once, but twice. I think that's what I found myself enjoying most in Abby. She's not a good person, but she's trying as hard as she can to be a good person. As opposed to Ellie, who wants to be a good person, but wants everyone to suffer horribly. Ellie and Abby had been complete opposites of each other. Ellie's story was one of tragedy. Ellie's story goes from happy to sad, heroic to tragic. Abby's story goes the other way around. It's a redemption arc. We see her go from person we hate all the way to a character that we can understand. And her flashbacks don't go from happy to sad. We see Abby's saddest flashback first and her happiest flashback last. The worse Ellie gets, the better Abby gets, and vice versa. Back at the theater, there is a boss battle where the player is forced to play as Abby fighting Ellie. And this was a genius boss battle. It was not a fun boss battle. Not because it was not well designed. It was beautifully designed. It's one of the greatest boss battles of all time, but it was not fun in terms of story. I didn't hate Ellie, and I didn't love Abby. I didn't want to have to fight Ellie, yet here I was. I knew why Abby was fighting her, but I didn't want to fight her. I didn't know which side to root for, and by the end, I wasn't rooting for either. Most boss battles show you playing as the side that you're supposed to be on, and here I was forced to play on a side I wasn't on, and fighting someone whose side I wasn't on. The end of this fight had me sweating. Dina comes in to save Ellie after Abby beats her down and breaks her arm, but Abby quickly wins the fight and is about to execute Dina when Ellie pleads for Dina's life by telling Abby that Dina's pregnant, but understandably so. That just makes Abby more interested in killing Dina. This moment in the story was without question the most intense. Abby's holding a knife to Dina's throat and Ellie is helpless to stop it. I do not want Dina to die, and I certainly don't want the character I've come to respect to be the one to do it, but I couldn't blame Abby for her decision. She earned that moment of revenge more than Ellie earned any of hers. But luckily Lev decided to interfere. Lev is what keeps the last of Abby's good intact. We would have had 2 complete evils trapped in an endless cycle of war, but that's not what we got. The battle ends in the most perfect way. Abby lets both Ellie and Dina live and tells them to stop coming after her, and then she leaves to go take Lev to the Fireflies. After this fight, the game takes a huge shift. It calms down. For the first time in hours, everything seems happy. Abby and Lev are on their way to the Fireflies, seemingly out of harm's way, and Ellie and Dina are now living on a farm with their son. Both sides have come to peace with everything that has transpired, and they've moved on. Until... Ellie just can't let go. The last image she has in her mind of Joel is his bloody body lying on the ground at Abby's feet, and no matter how much she tries, that image won't leave her mind until she gets revenge on the person that did it. In the following scene, we get to see the complete absence of Ellie's mental state. She has everything she has ever wanted. She has a family, she's happy, but she gives it all up in exchange for killing Abby.
I'm not gonna do this again. That's up to you.
And that brings us to the fantastic and bone-chilling final act of the game. At some point after Ellie left Dina to hunt for Abby, Abby and Lev were captured and tortured, and hung on poles on the beach and left to die. Ellie leaves a trail of bodies behind her on her way to find Abby, and when she does, Abby's hair is cut, she's starving, weak, and close to death. Ellie sees Abby hanging there and finally sees the humanity in her. She frees Abby and even helps her and Lev to a boat to leave. But Ellie can't forget. She sees blood and has that image in her head again. She can't let it go. She won't let it go. Abby has to die. Both Ellie and Abby had pros and cons for the entire game, but Abby finally beat out Ellie as a character for me when she refused to fight because her only concern was getting Lev to safety. Abby doesn't want to fight. She just wants the closest thing she has to a family to live. Sound familiar? But Ellie doesn't care, and she'll do whatever she has to make Abby fight her, including holding a knife to a child's throat. Both arcs culminate right there. Ellie, the sweet, innocent child who people have known for a total of 50 to 60 hours across both games and DLC, is now ready to kill a kid in cold blood, whereas Abby, the character who killed our favorite character out of revenge, just wants to get to safety. Ellie's tragic. Ellie's no longer good. Her last shred of heroism is gone, but Abby's heroism is only growing. The fight has a subtle yet beautiful callback to the ending of the first game to bring both games full circle with each other. Ellie is about to kill a child. Ellie is in the role of Abby's dad. Lev is helpless and unaware of the impending death. Therefore, Lev is Ellie. And Abby? Abby's about to do whatever she has to save Lev. Abby is Joel. The two characters fight. It is raw and it is brutal. The worst part about a boss battle with two characters who you wish wouldn't fight is that the game forces you to be on one side or the other. We fought Ellie as Abby, and now we have to fight Abby as Ellie. But this time it somehow feels even more wrong. Every time the game forced me to swing and stab at Abby, I did not want to do so. But I had to move on. I had to fight her. And after Abby bites Ellie's fingers off, Ellie gains the upper hand, and the fight comes to a close. 30 hours of gameplay. 30 hours of character development, and it brings both characters to this moment. Ellie is about to kill Abby, but she can't. There is one more quick flash of Joel, and then Ellie stops. She lets Abby walk, and she and Lev escape to safety, leaving Ellie alone on the beach. The final fight stands as another of the most divisive aspects of The Last of Us 2, and might even take the trophy for most controversial. Many people take issue with the fact that Ellie leaves a trail of bodies everywhere she goes on her journey, but all of a sudden stops at Abby. But I think that is the most logical ending for this story. Ellie killing Abby in cold blood would make absolutely no sense for multiple reasons, but here's one of the most important ones. Abby killed Joel right in front of Ellie. If Ellie kills Abby now, she's doing to Lev exactly what Abby did to her. She'd be killing the person Lev loves right in front of him. Ellie would become the woman she hates. Ellie would effectively be Abby, and Abby would be Joel, while Lev is a helpless Ellie. And that is the point of Ellie's line.
Just take him.
Most of the people Ellie kills on her journey are for the sake of her own survival. It is either kill or be killed. The only people Ellie never had to kill were Nora, Owen, and Mel. She killed them just to hurt Abby, but what Ellie learned here is what Abby had learned throughout her story. Revenge gains you nothing. People always claim that Abby got off easy and wins at the end, but that is the poorest understanding of this story. Abby got off just slightly easier than Ellie. Abby's quest for vengeance against Joel resulted in her losing almost everything. The only reason that she didn't lose everything and still has Lev is because Ellie saw the value in living. Because Ellie came to understand the reason that Joel did what he did, she came to understand the reason Abby did what she did. The Last of Us Part 2 has the single greatest ending to any video game. It sees Ellie return home with no fingers since Abby bit them off in their fight. She opens the door, but no one's inside. Dina's not there, and neither is Dina's child. The entire house is abandoned. Ellie picked revenge over Dina, and that resulted in Dina leaving her. Ellie goes upstairs to find a guitar. The guitar that Joel gave her at the start of the game. The guitar that he played a song on that Ellie could never replicate because it reminded her of their good times, which in turn reminded her of how their story ended. Ellie tries to finally play the song now that she's at peace, but she can't. She has no fingers, and as a result, she can never play the guitar that Joel left for her. She can never play their song. And after she tries and fails several times, the game finally shows the full flashback from the quick moment during the final fight against Abby. We find Joel on a porch playing a guitar. Ellie and Joel talk, but their conversation feels forced. They feel like two distant people trying to get to know each other. This is completely different from what we saw throughout the first game. After a few moments of talking, Ellie finally has the nerve to bring up the time that Joel chose her over saving all of humanity. She was willing to die to create a cure, and Joel wouldn't let her. It's worth mentioning that the following dialogue is the only time I have ever cried for a video game.
If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.
Yeah. I don't think I can ever forgive you for that. But I would like to try.
I'd like that.
Okay. I'll see you around.
Yep.
That was it. Their final conversation. The last time they saw each other before Joel was murdered. And that is the lesson. The theme of The Last of Us Part 2 is not that revenge is bad. The theme of The Last of Us Part 2 is forgiveness. The final moments see Ellie thinking about her adventures. There is no dialogue, no flashbacks, nothing, but the player knows what she's thinking about. She's thinking about everything she lost due to her emotions. She couldn't even keep her fingers. Ellie comes to understand why Joel did what he did. She never got the chance to forgive him in person, which is probably a major reason for her hatred towards Abby, but at this moment she does. She forgives Joel for what he did. And while Ellie will never be able to forgive Abby for killing the closest thing she had to a father, she understands Abby. She understands everything Abby did and why. And I honestly think that if given the time and the chance to talk to Abby, Ellie would try to forgive her too. The final shot of the game is an excellent callback to its predecessor, to Ellie's fear, and that brings the stories of both games to their only natural conclusion. This is not a happy universe. It is difficult to have happy endings in this world. And I think Ellie getting a happy ending would have been a bigger disrespect to the game and characters than people think this game was. And what does the ending do best? Well, it shows the result of being so consumed by anger and hatred.
How is it that you're never scared?
Who says that I'm not?
What are you scared of?
Being by myself?
I'm scared of ending up alone.
I respect every decision Naughty Dog made with The Last of Us Part 2. It would have been easier to milk the success of the first game and launch a franchise where Joel and Ellie go on a different adventure each installment, but Naughty Dog chose not to do that. Instead, they chose to tell one of the greatest stories across any form of media. They chose to tell a complex narrative about forgiveness and how revenge only leads to loss. They forced us to understand the mindset of an antagonist and how at the end of the day there is rarely good and bad, especially in this game's universe, but also in our own. Everyone is the hero of their own story. Sure, some people are pure evil, but people have their reasoning for everything, because everyone is human. The Last of Us Part 2 tells the story of two extremely flawed people, and it shows where their desires lead them. The game is a perfect reflection of real life, just set in a post-apocalyptic world where zombies wander the lands. The Last of Us Part 2 forces us to think about the world we live in. The Last of Us Part 2 forces us to think about everyone who lives on the planet. And most importantly, The Last of Us Part 2 forces us to think about ourselves.